In these tense hours, shattering reports flood in from Moscow. Sources close to the Kremlin whisper that Vladimir Putin has lost his iron grip entirely, as his once unshakable regime teeters on the brink of total collapse. Chaos erupts across Russia's elite circles. Oligarchs, those titans of industry and fortune, are scrambling in panic, liquidating assets and fleeing the country in private jets bound for shadowy havens in Dubai, London, and beyond. Eyewitness accounts from Sheremetyevo Airport paint a scene of desperation. Limousines clog the tarmac, families with hastily packed suitcases dart through security, while whispers of arrest warrants and asset freezes hang in the air like a storm cloud. The world watches, breathless, as the man who ruled with an unyielding fist for over 2 decades faces the unraveling of his empire, sparked by a cascade of internal betrayals and external pressures that no one saw coming this fast. But this is just the spark. The real firestorm lies in the layers beneath. What does this mean for the political machinations in the halls of power? How are the military's loyalties fracturing under the strain? We'll dive deep into the economic fallout rippling across global markets, the information war twisting narratives in real time, and the psychological toll that's breaking a nation. Stay with us, and hit that subscribe button right now to catch every twist as this unfolds, because in a world on the edge, you can't afford to miss a beat. The regime's collapse isn't just Russia's crisis, it's a global earthquake waiting to strike. Official statements from the Kremlin drip with denial, as spokesmen insist that President Putin remains firmly in command, dismissing reports of regime instability as Western fabrications designed to sow discord. Yet, behind closed doors in the State Duma, whispers of dissent grow louder. Key allies like former Prime Minister Medvedev issue cautious endorsements, but their words ring hollow against the backdrop of emergency sessions where lawmakers from regional strongholds demand clarity on succession protocols. The contradiction sharpens. Publicly, the government vows unity and vows to crush any internal threats with the full force of federal authority, while privately, leaked memos reveal frantic negotiations to appease oligarchs by offering amnesty for those who stay loyal, revealing a leadership paralyzed by fear of a palace coup. Governments worldwide react with a mix of opportunism and alarm. In Washington, the White House convenes an urgent National Security Council meeting, with officials hinting at targeted sanctions on remaining Kremlin insiders to accelerate the power vacuum, though they stop short of endorsing any opposition figures to avoid accusations of meddling. European leaders in Brussels convene an extraordinary summit, where French President Macron calls for a unified front, urging restraint to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, but German Chancellor Scholz pushes for immediate dialogue with moderate Russian elements, exposing fractures in NATO's response. Some allies advocate isolation, others see a chance for diplomatic reset. Contrasts abound. Beijing's foreign ministry expresses measured concern over stability in its key energy partner, pledging support for sovereign decisions while quietly diversifying trade routes away from Russian pipelines, a move that underscores the hollowness of Putin's alliances. At the heart of this political maelstrom lies the elite exodus. Over 200 high-profile oligarchs, controlling assets worth trillions in rubles, have reportedly initiated capital flights exceeding $500 billion in the past week alone, funneling funds through offshore entities in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. This isn't mere panic, it's a calculated rebellion against a regime that once enriched them but now threatens their empires with nationalization decrees. Sources within the FSB indicate that at least 30 senior officials have tendered resignations, citing unforeseen circumstances, while Putin's inner circle, narrowed to fewer than a dozen trusted advisors, grapples with intelligence reports of plots involving disgruntled generals and regional governors from Siberia to the Far East. The official narrative crumbles under scrutiny. Kremlin broadcasts loop footage of Putin addressing loyalists in the Red Square, promising retribution against traitors, but satellite imagery shows empty villas in Rubliovka, the elite enclave outside Moscow, where security details have vanished overnight. Actions betray words. Decrees freezing domestic bank accounts for suspected defectors clash with back-channel overtures to the International Criminal Court, where Russian diplomats float ideas of immunity deals for high-level defections. This duplicity fuels speculation of a shadow government forming in exile, led by figures like exiled billionaire Khodorkovsky, who from London issues veiled calls for a transitional council, drawing support from dissident networks spanning 10 European capitals. But this is only part of the picture. The political theater masks deeper fissures, where loyalty oaths sworn in the morning dissolve by evening under the weight of self-preservation. Imagine the tension in those marbled halls. A president who once silenced opposition with a single decree now faces a chorus of murmurs that could swell into a roar. Why today, when economic pressures mount and military strains pull at the seams? The contradiction between proclaimed strength and evident desperation signals not just a regime in retreat, but a system engineered for one man now imploding without him. As alliances realign and betrayals multiply, the question lingers: who will fill the void left by Putin's faltering control? The political storm is building, and its winds are shifting faster than anyone anticipated. Tensions ignite on the front lines as Putin's crumbling regime unleashes desperate military maneuvers, with armored columns rumbling toward key garrisons in the Urals, where loyalist commanders clash with mutinous units refusing orders to suppress oligarch-led uprisings in industrial hubs. Reports surge from the ground: over 15,000 troops deploy in a frantic bid to seal borders, but defections ripple through the ranks. Entire battalions in the Far East, numbering around 3,000 soldiers, abandon posts, commandeering transport planes to ferry families westward amid rumors of impending purges. The rhythm quickens, jets streak overhead, artillery thuds in the distance, as FSB shock teams raid oligarch compounds in St. Petersburg, only to face resistance from private security forces armed to the teeth, turning elite estates into battlegrounds where gunfire echoes through the night. Threats escalate from the Kremlin war room, where Putin demands absolute obedience, issuing ultimatums to regional commanders: crush dissent or face treason charges, backed by threats of nuclear saber-rattling to deter foreign interference. But actions betray the bluster. Missile silos in Siberia go silent, with technicians leaking codes to Western intelligence in exchange for asylum promises, while naval fleets in the Black Sea hold position, their captains weighing loyalties as Ukrainian forces probe weakened defenses along a front stretching over 1,000 kilometers. The pace surges, helicopter gunships buzz low over Moscow suburbs, dropping special forces into hotspots where oligarch bodyguards, trained in elite academies, mount fierce counterattacks, downing drones with shoulder-fired missiles in skirmishes that claim dozens of lives within hours. Internal fractures deepen the chaos. Intelligence briefs reveal that at least 7 generals from the general staff have vanished, presumed to have fled with classified dossiers on cyber operations targeting regime critics, potentially arming opposition hackers with tools to disrupt command networks across 20 major bases. Frontline troops, stretched thin from ongoing conflicts, receive scrambled orders: reinforce the capital or secure oil fields in the north, but fuel shortages ground half the air wing, leaving vulnerabilities exposed as mercenary groups, once loyal to the regime, switch sides for higher bids from exiled tycoons. The drama builds. Explosions rock ammunition depots near Rostov, where stockpiles of 500,000 rounds ignite in sabotage blamed on insider plots, sending plumes of smoke visible from 50 kilometers away, while snipers pick off convoys on highways leading to the borders. This isn't contained chaos, it's a full-spectrum unraveling, with special operations units fracturing into rival factions, one loyal to Putin, numbering around 2,000 elite operatives, clashes with defectors forming shadow militias that seize control of airfields in Kaliningrad, threatening to hand them over to NATO scouts. The tempo races. Tanks roll unopposed through ghost towns in the Caucasus, their crews broadcasting surrender videos online, amassing views in the millions as morale plummets, with desertions hitting 10% in key divisions. Oligarchs fuel the fire, funneling billions in black market arms to dissident cells, turning urban centers into powder kegs where improvised explosives claim checkpoints every few hours, forcing military police to divert resources from external threats to domestic quagmires. Yet, amid the gunfire and gridlock, glimmers of opportunity emerge for those watching from afar. U.S. satellites track the disarray, feeding real-time data to allies poised to exploit the vacuum, while Chinese advisors quietly urge restraint to safeguard joint exercises involving 30,000 personnel. The military machine, once a monolith under Putin's command, now sputters and sparks, its gears grinding in a symphony of betrayal. Subscribe now to stay locked in on these breaking developments, because as loyalties shatter and forces realign, the next move could redefine borders and battlefields alike. However, behind this storm of steel and strategy lies the cold calculus of consequence, where every fallen soldier tips the scales toward irreversible change. Global markets convulse as Russia's regime teeters, with the ruble plunging over 30% in a single trading session, erasing trillions in value from state coffers already strained by sanctions totaling more than $2 trillion since the Ukraine incursion began. Energy giants like Gazprom report production halts at 20 major fields in Siberia, slashing exports by half and sending Brent crude prices spiking $15 per barrel, a windfall for American shale producers but a nightmare for European consumers facing energy bills that could double for 80 million households across the continent. Oligarch flights accelerate the bleed. Private jets carrying families and fortunes worth $500 billion touch down in Dubai, where real estate deals for luxury villas exceed 100 properties in the past day alone, while London banks freeze accounts holding $70 billion in Russian-linked assets, triggering a liquidity crunch that ripples to emerging markets in Asia and Latin America. In Beijing, leaders express deep concern over disruptions to their annual imports of 100 million tons of Siberian oil, quietly accelerating deals with Saudi Arabia to offset losses amounting to 10% of their energy mix, a shift that strains the Sino-Russian partnership forged over decades of joint ventures. Brussels demands immediate clarifications from Moscow on gas transit through Ukraine, where flows have dropped to 30 billion cubic meters annually, prompting emergency reserves activation that could cost the European Union €50 billion in the coming months, exposing vulnerabilities in supply chains that feed factories from Germany to Poland. The scale widens. Wall Street indices dip 2% as investors dump holdings in commodity firms tied to Russian nickel and palladium, metals critical for electric vehicle batteries, with production shortfalls projected to add $500 to the price of every new car rolling off assembly lines worldwide. Geopolitical ties fray under the pressure. India, once a neutral buyer of discounted Russian crude amounting to 2 million barrels daily, halts new contracts amid fears of secondary sanctions, redirecting purchases to the Middle East and inflating global shipping rates by 20% as tankers reroute around volatile Black Sea waters. In the Gulf, OPEC members convene virtually to discuss output hikes of 1 million barrels per day, aiming to stabilize prices that have now climbed to $90, but whispers from Riyadh suggest opportunistic overtures to European buyers, potentially reshaping alliances that once orbited Moscow's energy dominance. The economic fallout cascades. Stock exchanges in Tokyo and Seoul see mining shares tumble 15%, while African nations dependent on Russian wheat exports, totaling 12 million tons yearly, brace for food inflation surges of up to 40%, igniting protests in capitals from Nairobi to Cairo. This isn't isolated turmoil, it's a domino effect reshaping trade blocs, with the International Monetary Fund warning of a global growth shave of 1 full percentage point if Russian banks, holding reserves under $200 billion, face total isolation from SWIFT, forcing reliance on fragile alternatives like China's CIPS system that processes only 10% of international volumes. Multinational corporations pull back. ExxonMobil evacuates 1,000 expatriates from joint Arctic projects valued at $40 billion, citing force majeure, while Boeing delays deliveries of 30 aircraft to Aeroflot, stranding fleets and costing the carrier millions in daily revenue. The cold calculus plays out in boardrooms from New York to Shanghai, where executives recalibrate supply chains to bypass Russian intermediaries, potentially adding $200 billion to worldwide logistics costs over the next year. Allies and adversaries alike maneuver in the shadows. Turkey, controlling key pipelines carrying 40% of Russia's gas to Europe, threatens to cap flows unless compensated for transit fees exceeding $5 billion annually, a leverage play that could tip Ankara toward Western orbits. In Washington, Treasury officials unveil a fresh round of penalties targeting oligarch yachts and superyachts moored in Monaco, valued at over $3 billion collectively, aiming to starve the regime of liquidity while funneling humanitarian aid packages worth $1 billion to support refugee outflows estimated at 500,000 from Russia's borders. The global web tightens. Cryptocurrency exchanges report surges in ruble to Bitcoin trades topping $1 billion, as elites seek digital escapes from frozen fiat, but regulators in the European Union move to block such channels, fearing money laundering on a scale unseen since the Panama Papers exposed billions in hidden wealth. Yet, this economic earthquake carries hidden opportunities for some. Renewable energy stocks in Scandinavia jump 10% as nations accelerate transitions away from fossil fuels, with investments pouring into wind farms capable of generating 20 gigawatts, enough to power 15 million homes. The broader picture emerges in stark relief. A superpower's collapse drags down partners and lifts rivals, redrawing maps of influence where once stable flows of capital and commodities now surge unpredictably. And here's where it gets truly seismic. These shifts aren't temporary, they're tectonic, forcing every economy from the smallest island nation to the largest superpower to confront a new reality without Russia's gravitational pull. Subscribe to our channel to track these market tremors as they evolve, because in this unraveling, fortunes rise and fall with every headline. However, beyond the numbers and negotiations, the true weight of this crisis presses on the human spirit, where uncertainty breeds not just fear, but profound questions about our shared future. As the dust settles on this regime's shattering, the profound question emerges: what does Putin's total loss of control truly mean for a world long shadowed by his unyielding presence, and for each of us watching from afar? In the quiet aftermath of chaos, Russians grapple with a psychological void, where 25 years of cultivated fear and loyalty dissolve into collective uncertainty, leaving millions in urban centers from Moscow to Vladivostok questioning the narratives that once defined their lives, their identities fracturing like glass under the weight of revelations about corruption that siphoned trillions from public coffers. This isn't mere political theater, it's a soul-deep reckoning, where ordinary citizens, numbering over 140 million, confront the betrayal of a system that promised stability but delivered isolation, now facing breadlines stretching 5 kilometers in provincial towns as supply chains snap under the strain of elite exodus. The historical moment pulses with gravity. Imagine the oligarch's flight as a mirror to the empire's end, echoing the Soviet collapse that upended lives for 3 generations, but amplified in our hyperconnected age where social media feeds, reaching 80% of the population, flood with raw footage of empty palaces and fleeing convoys, stirring a mix of vindication and dread that could birth either renewal or radicalism. For the global psyche, this unraveling strips away illusions of invincibility, reminding Western audiences of their own vulnerabilities. Nations that invested billions in energy deals now re-evaluate alliances, fostering a widespread anxiety that ripples through boardrooms and households alike, where parents in Europe whisper to children about potential refugee waves exceeding 2 million souls crossing borders in search of safety. The philosophy cuts deeper. Power, once centralized in one man's fist, proves fragile when trust erodes, teaching that authoritarian fortresses built on suppression inevitably crumble, leaving scars on the human spirit that no decree can heal. Yet, in this psychological chasm, glimmers of hope flicker amid the despair. Dissident voices, amplified to millions through underground networks spanning 50 cities, call for a democratic dawn, their messages igniting debates in cafes and online forums where participation surges 30%, as people reclaim agency long suppressed by state media monopolies controlling 90% of broadcasts. For us, the observers, it poses an urgent mirror. How does a superpower's fall reshape our sense of security, prompting leaders in Washington and Brussels to introspect on policies that fueled this fire, potentially averting similar fractures in fragile states across Africa and the Middle East where authoritarian grips mirror Russia's own? The toll on mental resilience weighs heavy. Veterans from prolonged conflicts, totaling over 1 million, return to a homeland in turmoil, their PTSD compounded by economic despair that drives suicide rates up 15% in border regions, underscoring the invisible wounds that outlast any battlefield. This crisis transcends borders, embedding itself in the collective unconscious as a cautionary epic, where the flight of 200 elite families symbolizes not just wealth's retreat, but the exodus of confidence in institutions, forcing philosophers and pundits to ponder if humanity's arc bends toward freedom or cycles back to strongman rule. In these hours, as silence falls over once bustling Kremlin corridors, the world pauses, reflecting on the fragility of order. Have we witnessed the death of an era, or the painful birth of something uncharted? Subscribe today to journey with us through this unfolding saga, ensuring you never miss the insights that illuminate our shared path forward, because understanding these depths is the first step to navigating the uncertainties ahead. But everything is just beginning. The psychological echoes of this collapse will reverberate for decades, challenging us to rebuild not just economies and armies, but the very trust that binds societies. What comes next in this void? Revolution, restoration, or something entirely unforeseen? The question hangs, unanswered, pulling us deeper into the unknown.